So, what I wanted to do today was to add to our conversation online about the goals that we pursue for this semester and also about how we can actually learn to think critically about the things that we research so that the course itself has some real value to us for our future careers. So, obviously, that value will need to be broken down into a number of aspects. So, for example, what do I want to do with the course? Another question is, as a result, what kind of communities do I need to connect with? Another question is, what kinds of questions are pertinent to those communities? And as a result, how can I be of help? One doesn't need to do EMG 609, which is a unit where you actually have, actively engage with a particular institution or people in order to produce research for them. You can actually do this kind of work from any unit, because the questions that I'm posing are relevant for you. Doesn't matter what unit you will do in this course. But another question that nobody asks, well, nobody, rarely is asked, is actually, what kinds of axioms are you working within to build your arguments? Now, I know that this is a strange word for you, or some of you, but basically, what axioms means is what sometimes people call the ontology of your research. In other words, what are the key belief systems within which you function that actually justify the way you go about your framing your questions and then as a result pursuing your research. And you would think, well, they're obvious. Actually, the entire intellectual wars in education or anywhere in the world, in fact, because at the end of the day, we all share our ideas about it. So all our wars are about those axioms, which is, why do you think the way you think? Right? So that's the key question. In order to actually make this issue of axioms more digestible for anyone who's listening to this presentation, I actually focused the problem of those axioms in education between two questions, or on the two questions, whether your job as a researcher is to build students or to build theories. Now, they're very different questions, right? So if you want to build theories, you don't actually work with a student as the student is, and there's lots of them, as you know, but everybody is different. But so you don't work with the student, you work with the questions of the theory. So you look at the reality from the perspective of a theory. So imagine if you took a pipe, and you attached it to your eye to look at the world, you would only see what the theory allows you to see, right? And that's what theories are for. Theories allow you to see what the theory makes relevant. So, for example, if you're a linguist, when you look at the text, what do you see? Nouns, verbs, adjectives, and the relationships between those, right? But when you are a cultural theorist, you see customs, practices. I don't know what cultural theorists see. I'm not one. So depending on your theory or on your perspective, you see those things, you don't see others. And your job is to see how far or how much you can do with a specific theory, or how much can a particular theory help you explain about reality. The difficulty with that attitude is that you are locked within the permissions of the theory, and when you are locked in this way, your research is actually self-referential, so you're always right. This is the danger that education very rarely actually looks into, right? They are always right. And I'll give you example. Today's presentation will give you some examples of it, but one of the examples is when people say, well, this research is constructed on the basis of a specific theory which says that this is how students learn, right? So you're not questioning it, you actually are turning now student into a research site. I didn't invent that term, sadly. So when you go on our central website, which is the Master of Education Global Learning Central, and you go to online classroom, underneath I put in there some on the menu a label called staff bibliography or something like that, and if you go to my page, you find the article actually on this topic, which is the building students or building theories, and some other papers of mine that actually address this. I've written so many papers lately that I just can't keep the track, and I'm writing still right now. In any way, the issue of turning students into a research site, don't you think? It has been mentioned by, I think, Biesta or someone like that in his book. There was a book by Biesta, Allen, and Edwards, probably published, I'm not quite sure, 2014 or something like that. Some of these texts are made to me visible by my PhD students, so this one was. And they talk about when the issue of turning students into a research site. So you're no longer serving the student, you're serving a theory. So obviously an alternative to serving theory is to serve students. Now, you may wish to actually ask yourself, how the heck are you going to serve the student as opposed to serving theory? So I've clearly have done some work on that, and definitely my own PhD some time ago was addressing this kind of issue, which is how do you as a researcher concerned with learning improvements, how do you actually respond to the students' needs as opposed to the theory's needs? Now, needs is an interesting word. People have criticized it, so let's actually play with it. So let's replace the needs with the word questions, okay? So let's play with it. How do you in your research help responding to the questions of theory as opposed to questions that students have when dealing with the task at hand? Right? So the questions of the theory as opposed to questions that students experience when grappling with the task at hand. Well, you can see now that they're very different. The questions that come from theory are certain because the theory has built all the conditions around it, right? When you see the world, you see grammar. When you see grammar, you see words and relationships between them. And now, whatever you do, the answer is in the relationships between the grammatical items like noun, verb, adjectives, adverbs, all that, right? So you know where to look for the answer because the theory tells you in linguistic structures. So you're safe. You're fine. You can cruise your life for the next 30 years talking about those speech parts that you learned when you were 6. Now, people made professorships on this and on this type of methodology. In terms of, for example, my own research interest, which has been in pedagogy of language teaching, in pedagogy of second language learning, and also in literacy, I can't see that this type of research has actually generated much good for the students. We're still sort of at the introductory level. And there are reasons for it. So now, if we were to look into the student, we don't actually know. Look how much uncertainty is there. We don't really know what kinds of questions students actually experience when grappling at the task at hand. Now imagine if a student is to create a brochure in French, or wants to keep it small and short, wants to create a brochure in English for the tourism office. Right? So this is a literacy activity as opposed to language learning activity. They both actually mean the same, because when you want to create a brochure for the tourism office, when your class wants to create a brochure for the tourism office of it to advertise your region and to do it in a cooler way than it's normally done, it's a language learning activity at the end of the day. But we don't really know what questions they might have because there's so many students. And as a result, where will we find an answer? Now, the mind is boggling, we're in overdrive, we have no idea with what to do, and what's typically done? People very quickly shift to building theories because we don't want to work with the uncertain. We want to work with the certain. Sadly, the treasure is in the working with the uncertain, right? Because if the world is uncertain, then the treasure cannot be in certainty, because the world is not certain. So what to do? One thing I would suggest that what you need to do is to have some axioms now that allow you to actually work with the uncertain. So one of these axioms is the world is uncertain. What the student has on his or her mind is uncertain. I have a nice slide for that. I'll see whether I can find it. Okay, so I found these quotes from my own work and work with my students. And many of you are familiar with the concept of habitus. If you're not, please check it on Wikipedia. That you should have a pretty rudimentary explanation of it. But a better way is actually to find a direct quote from Bourdieu's book. I think it's called The Outline of Practice, and also The Logic of Practice, right? So in all of his books, he actually defines the concept of habitus, which is the structuring structures, right? Structuring structures, the structures that structure your way of living in the world, right? So these structures come from different places. Certainly some of them are biological, some of them, and maybe the biological determine how you actually then engage in the world, in the external world, and how you, as a result, your biological structures expand now in order to have more abstract categories, right, which you actually acquire and build on top of your biological ones, and you acquire those from your experiences as you go through life. So basically the key here issue is that I wanted to point out is that categories in relation to which students make meaning are not product of objective facts captured by the language of formal disciplines. This is what we were saying, how the theory describes an action is not how the action actually happens. It's like if you draw a human being, or if you, in terms of rough sketches, this is not a human being, right? It's just a drawing of a human being. So what life is not how you draw it. You can't draw life. What you draw is a representation of your perspective on life. So the categories in relation to which students make meaning are not a product of objective facts captured by the language of formal disciplines. They are experienced. Those categories are experienced as subjective judgments that draw on students' value categories, right? So you do things because you see the reason for it. That is, categories of experiences that have motivational significance, right? And that inform people how to be or act in the world. Something has a meaning when it has implications for action. Right? Something is meaningful to you because you are drawn in that direction. It has implications for action. There's another way I put it here. These categories can be captured by the concept of habitus. They are the meaning-making mechanisms that are constructed in the course of one's life. These meaning-making mechanisms are what makes up a person. They are stored in the form of internal representations that modulate how the world is both experienced, understood, and responded to. In short, the relationships in text, their meaning and structure, cannot be determined by ignoring the user, the individual who both constructs and interprets the meaning of these relationships. So, in short, all these concepts from Bourdieu, which is sociology, from Jordan Peterson, who is a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, from Andrew Peter Lian, who is a language teacher, and obviously from artificial intelligence and many other fields, basically confirm that that the world is uncertain, and if you want to actually assist students learning, you need to think of ways how to work with that uncertainty. Otherwise, you actually build theories, you don't build students. An interesting point. Something that makes our life not only uncertain as researchers, but our job quite troubling, because we don't have the three grains that we can just continue reshuffling, hoping that some evidence will emerge. What we have is an infinite we have nothing basically, and everything and when this nothing turn into ingredients, what we have is always a theory, right? Every category, every representation of the world we construct as researchers, it's a theory. The question is how to work with theory in order to inform uncertainty, which is the student, as opposed to in order to wipe out the student and then only continue informing the theory. That's the challenge of education as I pose it in this paper and as I see it as a researcher. Now, I have actually given this paper in Indonesia, and I have actually gotten that key note recorded but by one of my PhD students, so I will give you access to that YouTube link, so I don't have to present the whole paper. But I just want to talk about the relevance of categorizing and knowing what we're actually doing, right? Whether we're theoreticians serving theory, and that has nothing to do with education or at least with context of education where we're dealing with real people. I want to focus on this and focus on the problems that this view presents to education. So, for example, when people actually don't make a distinction that I have just discussed, this is what happens. Let's have a look. In my undergraduate courses, where I teach literacy, I use a paper by Maren Ockerman. She's from Stanford. Well, last time she was in Stanford when I knew her. So Maren Stanford produced a lot of research on literacy teaching. And the text in blue that you see here under the section part 1, the context of this lesson, as you can see, it's a lesson, right? You have a dialogue, so clearly there's a lesson happening here. This is an extract from a class created especially for students who have difficulties in reading. So what's happening here, the teacher had an idea. In order to actually assist students in their reading, what she might do is to gather those children together, make everybody have one book, and everyone read together a text. So, for example, Adam reads sentence 1, Thomas reads sentence 2, or whatever. And then if a discussion emerges as a result, that might actually help these children with whatever issues that might emerge as a result. The key point here was that the teacher claimed that she or he was not interfering with the students. Now, how could it be? If you have a confined environment and you have already a pre-planned plan of action, you already have interference, right? So it's a kind of like a hope that the teacher is not interfering, but let's run with it. So let's have a look what the student, what kind of discussion has emerged as a result of this methodology. So Adam says, or reads, a miller and his son set off to market to sell their donkey, leading the beast behind them. Hearing the word beast, Adam hypothesized the donkey may be very mean, so they don't want to ride him. The teacher doesn't react. Thomas adds, beast can mean a lot of things. It can mean like what Adam is thinking, big and mean and stuff. But beast can also just mean that he is big. Adam responds, I know, but they are selling him, leading the beast behind them. Thomas, yeah, maybe. They need the money. Now some time passes, so obviously the point didn't get resolved. Now, what do we think of the pedagogy itself? Like, just let's get stuck with that little scene in the blue. Does the pedagogy of gathering children together and reading together and then hoping or whatever, thinking that maybe a discussion emerges and children can actually work out for themselves any issues that the text may actually raise in them, is that sort of nice? Is this lovely? Is this correct? And how do you know? Certainly, I mean, I am sometimes a little bit mischievous, and I'd say my mother would think it's great, but my mother is 90, and she loves children. If she could, she would have had 10, right? And 300 grandchildren. I mean, my mother loves children. She loves it. Let's hug together. Let's read one book together. Let me show you something else. Now, I've been reading obviously on the issue of pedagogy of literacy and language teaching and of anything really, but pedagogy mainly of literacy and languages. And if I make it larger, Now all of us can look at this picture on the right, on my right, and you can see these children stuck there and this person with this stick in front of them. You obviously have a negative reaction instantly, right? You say, oh no, we don't do that. No, we wouldn't like that. It's a transfer model, right? So what happens here? The teacher makes sure that children get things right, right? And is this the role of a teacher? So this teacher, this is the model. They call it Lancaster's monitorial system. There's a knowledge, there's a method for putting this knowledge into students' heads, right? So the students are receivers of that knowledge. Well, do you think that in that classroom discussion never happened? Like, I mean, the picture shows the teacher in front of the children, but do you think the teacher never allowed for a sort of discussion to emerge and clarifying things? Anyway, so something for you to think about. Now, I'm just gonna cover that. When you look, all right, sorry for that. When you look at the picture on the left, the colorful picture, smiley children, well, at least this, we see smiles of the children that the camera actually captured. Is this any different? You know, like the teacher might not be standing in front of them, but well, let's have a look. So we got one teacher and one teacher here. We've got one book, everybody's looking in the same book, right? So here they have a big book and there they have many little books. Same book though. Everybody's reading the same book and everybody is looking at the same book. And what's the function of the teacher? What do you think? If you don't think that the function of the teacher is to make sure everybody gets it right, what else do you think the function here is? So these are the sort of questions I would like to ask you. So what I did in that paper on building students versus building theories, what I did, I actually looked for the axioms or intellectual framing of a study. So for example, I am fully aware that Maren Ockerman in her paper does talk about, I think it's called shared, I forgot this, so some sort of pedagogy of sharing, right? Sharing. Everybody likes sharing. You go to kindergarten and you hear you must share. So there. What about the people who don't want to share? My students always say that when Ania goes out for lunch, she doesn't share. I don't. I love when I order something, I don't share. That's just a joke. Anyway, so certainly Maren Ockerman has a pedagogy of sorts. So what I did, I actually looked for evidence. And I looked at, so I wrote the objective of literacy and the concept, what she wanted to achieve, I wrote here. What kind of notion of literacy was, so that's second column, build on the building theory. What kind of concept of literacy was informing her work, and on basis of what kind of empirical evidence from different disciplines did she derive that definition of literacy or the objective of literacy? I couldn't actually find any. Then I also looked into the concept of critical thinking. You know, you want children to discuss, obviously you want them to actually do the thinking. And I identified making decisions, blah, blah, blah. So here in the second column is how she actually constructed the concept of critical thinking, but I couldn't find any evidence. And in order to make sure that you get it right in your own research papers, I strongly encourage you that you actually don't just look at one article of a particular author, in this case Maren Ockerman, but you look at her other articles or articles of other people that actually subscribe to the same pedagogy, right? And you then actually now carefully with a pencil in your hand, you underlined where did they get that stuff from. And that's how you actually build your understanding of what truly informs our pedagogies, what kind of thinking, and where did we get it from. And when you see on the on the in the third column a lot of text, what I actually did there was to summarize where I get my concepts from in order to work with uncertainty. And there is a lot of stuff out there, way more than what they have in the second column. The thing here is not that they have something, I just summarized what she did, right? So this thing here, I will just insert a little icon here. Whoops, I think I took the wrong thing. A little shape here. So this stuff here, right? So we make it transparent. Well, I can't make it transparent because it's too difficult. But anyway, this stuff here, all this here, is not evidence from them. I just, for the purpose of my keynote in Indonesia, I just wanted people to actually see once again what Maren Ockerman did in terms of pedagogy, but there is no actually evidence. Whereas I have concepts and evidence from a number of fields. So from neuroscience, psychology, corrective phonetics, which is a field from a subfield of phonetics, which is we could call it applied phonetics, where actually people think of how to improve people's pronunciation when they actually study another language from psychology. So you can see that, I have actually accumulated quite a lot of work. So this is what happens now. In order to build a theory, you sit within the algorithms or assumptions or small amounts of variables of a particular theory, because those variables not only tell you what the problem is, but they also tell you where to find the answer. Now you see, normally it's called tautology. I'll just type it for you so you can actually, some of you might not actually know how to type it because English is such a language. So if you were Polish, you would read it as you write, tautology, right? Clear. But in English, you read it as tautology, which is those premises, those relationships of linguistics from both the problem and source of answer. I don't know how you do that, but they do that. So there you go. So not only the basis of work is tautological, but when you actually look into the sources of knowledge on which these people draw, it's very poor, if any. So in order to deal with certainty, you actually don't need much knowledge. Hence, the research in pedagogy is quite poor in the diversity of evidence from empirical studies like neuroscience or empirical and theoretical studies like anthropology, neuroscience, and so on. There's a lot of work now happening in neuroscience for the last, say, 15-20 years. It is totally absent. And when it is integrated, it's as integrated as, say, well, I don't know, very thinly. It really has no impact. There is this University of Queensland which got a multi-million-dollar grant from the Australian Research Council in order to actually think how neuroscience can be integrated, evidence from neuroscience could be integrated into education, and it's the same stuff all over again. They basically want to pack neuroscience into what they already know rather than using neuroscience in order to actually question what they know. So there's a whole field open because we are not used as a field to deal with uncertainty. Because to deal with uncertainty, you need to actually look at reality using categories from different disciplines in order to actually understand better your job as a researcher and how you could support a student. I will not talk about it in more detail today because this is not the point of my little short discussion. But I just wanted to stir you up a little bit and show you that the world is not as comfortable as it actually frequently is presented, that all you need to do is to get that students talk, or alternatively to tell them as it is, right? There are problems all over the place with thinking of that kind. Now, I may not have time today, no, I don't have the time today to do things with some other things with you that would be worthwhile to do, but on my page of our the staff bibliography that I was mentioning, what you will find there is this exciting article by Ramachandran. It's totally exciting. What he does is actually draws attention to the differences between the hemispheres and what these hemispheres actually do. And when things go wrong, you can see that if you rely too much on your left hemisphere, which is the hemisphere that knows everything, what happens even if I show you things in front of you, like here's a cup or here's the computer, you will not see it unless your left hemisphere already knows that that's what you should be seeing. It will deny the obvious. Now it's really funny. Ramachandran is an extraordinary writer. He thinks abstractly, hence his papers are not simply just statistical data, but actually theories and illustrating to you how you can ask questions of yourself in order to actually confront what you know. So there are exciting things happening in neuroscience. There is a skill still to learn what to do with it in order to integrate it into education, right? Because it's a skill. One thing I would suggest is not actually to reduce neuroscience to what we actually know, but to actually see what we can do with it. So that would be the discussion on my part with you for today. And I hope I have actually put some questions on your mind. And that was my goal for today. So I want to thank you. And I'll see you next Wednesday. And we'll have a great session. And I'm very sorry my computer died today. Well, my computer didn't die. It's just the connection didn't work very well today. So thank you very much. And thank you for your time. Bye.